Today's scandal is a pretty huge one in the world of sports. And in fact, the name Tim Donaghy is one that I've mentioned before in other scandal videos. First of all, he was one of the referees officiating the Malice at the Palace game. But also, during the 2002 NBA playoff final scandal, I'd mentioned this guy Tim, who was a referee. And, I said that he'd come out with this devastating statement, legal statement, that game had been fixed by the NBA. But I also mentioned that Tim wasn't the most reliable witness. Well, this is Tim's story. So, Tim Donaghy. He was born in 1967, just outside of Philadelphia. His dad was actually a pretty well-respected college basketball referee. And Tim attended high school at Cardinal O'Hara High School in Springfield. And interestingly, he went to high school with 3 other NBA referees, Joey Crawford, Mike Callahan, and Ed Malloy. Now, as a senior in high school, 1985, Tim knew that he wanted to attend Villanova University for college. His mother actually worked there as a secretary, and he would get, free tuition if he went to Villanova. But his SAT score was too low to be admitted at Villanova. He had scored around 800. So in the spring, 1985, Tim decides to take the SAT again. Now, during the exam, Tim walked out of the exam room to go to the washroom. And it is said that someone else, certainly not Tim Donaghy, walked back into the exam room to take the rest of the test. Now this allegation was according to a school staffer who had seen this happen and reported it to school administrators. When Tim's results came back, he had scored a 1200. Now, the officials who administered the test, they talked to Tim about, the suspicions. But of course, Tim denied it. He denied cheating. So in the end, the solution was to have him take the test again And on this third test, he scored 1,000. So he got into Villanova. Now, Tim would later state in his NBA bio, like his official referee's bio, on sort of NBA properties website, whatever, that, well, first of all, that he played on Villanova's baseball team. But according to George Bennett, who was the baseball coach at Villanova at the time, he did try out for the team, but he never made the team. His bio actually also claimed that he was named an all-Catholic high school player in baseball, which there are no records of. In fact, the Catholic League did name 2 Cardinal O'Hara players to the All-Star team in 1985, when Tim was a senior, but he was not one of them. And finally, about this bio, before we move on, he also claimed that he was named on the all-Delaware County basketball team, which is apparently also false, according to Bud Gardler, who was the basketball coach at Cardinal O'Hara. So some pretty credible sources debunking the claims that Tim made. He then spent 5 years officiating Pennsylvania high school basketball and 7 seasons in the Continental Basketball Association, the CBA. And then in 1994, he joined the NBA, where he worked for 13 years. He officiated 772 regular season games and 20 playoff games. Now, I said 13 years, right? So this brings us to 2007. And this is where the whole story takes place. If you've ever heard of the 2007 NBA betting scandal, this is the same story. So on June 20th, the New York Post, one of their columnists, Murray Weiss, they report that there's an investigation by the FBI into allegations of an NBA referee betting on games and controlling the point spread. Spread betting, if you're not necessarily familiar with sports betting, is basically where you're betting on either the favorite to win by a certain amount of points, or for the underdog to lose by a certain amount of point or to outright win the game. So the favorite needs to win by essentially more than the spread for you to win your bet. And if you take the underdog, you can win if they lose by fewer points than the spread, or if they win. So anyway, this story was quickly picked up by other major news agencies, and it was revealed that Tim was the referee under investigation. Basically found out, or was reported, that Tim placed tens of thousands of dollars in bets on games between the 2005-2006 season and the 2006-2007 season. And apparently he had been approached by, we'll say, low-level mob associates to work on this gambling scheme. Although reporters who worked the crime beat, they discounted this alleged involvement of the mob in the scandal. That being said, the NBA only found out about Tim Donaghy, his betting, because the FBI stumbled upon it when they were doing like a broader investigation into organized crime. So, of course, this is now major news. It's reaching beyond the world of professional sports. And now it's no longer just an investigation sort of happening quietly in the background. Now people want to hear from the NBA and from the authorities. You know, a lot of people bet on the sports. And not only that, even more people hold professional sports to very high esteem. And at the end of the day, people just want fairness. In sports teams and sports leagues. So, the NBA commissioner at the time, David Stern, he released a statement for the public saying, "We would like to assure our fans that no amount of effort, time, or personnel is being spared to assist in this investigation, to bring to justice an individual who has betrayed the most sacred trust in professional sports, and to take the necessary steps to protect against this ever happening again." And so, by the end of July, about a week after the New York Post article came out, Bobby Rush, who was let me make sure I get this right, the chairman of the U.S. House Committee on Energy and Commerce's Commerce, Trade, and Consumer Protection Subcommittee. He asked to meet with Stern regarding Tim. And in a letter to Stern, he said that he might call a hearing should the facts warrant public scrutiny He also said that this could potentially be one of the most damaging scandals in the history of American sports. That day, the New York Daily News, they reported that the bookies who were involved in this sort of betting scheme, they were actually two high school classmates of Tim's, and that they had found that Tim was actually the one who embellished their mob ties. One of them, I think his name was Batista, James Batista maybe. He might have actually had mob ties. I think he was the one that the FBI sort of got into this mess through. But still, the mob, it seems, was never really involved in the scandal. That's probably how that rumor started. And we later found out that since 2003, so this FBI investigation was really looking at 2005 to 2007, but it seems that since 2003, that sort of trio, or at least those two associates, even if you take Tim out of the picture, they were placing bets almost exclusively on games that Tim was officiating. In fact, Tim later tried to claim that he was actually betting equally on games that he wasn't working and games that he was working. He had a gambling addiction. That much must be true. But researchers who investigated the bets using betting records and betting line data, they concluded that there was no evidence that he did gamble on or place bets on games that he was not officiating. And a lot of evidence showing that he placed bets on the games that he did officiate. Initially, Tim did not comment on the allegations. Apparently, when reporters went to his house for a statement, anything from him, he would claim to be the butler of the Donaghy household. He also apparently turned on the sprinklers on a photographer, a freelance photographer who was there for the New York Times. Now, the butler thing is kind of weird, but I think the sprinklers are fair game. I mean, he deserves his privacy right at home, especially because he's got a wife and kids at the time. He still has kids. The wife ended up filing for divorce. And he ended up sort of moving to another location, a secret location, so that the media could not find him. Then, on August 15th, Tim did surrender to a Brooklyn federal court. And he pleaded guilty to 2 felony charges of conspiracy. He admitted to judges that he would use coded language to tip his associates about either the player's physical conditions, which was confidential information that he might receive as as a referee. And also about player and referee relationships. So how it would go down is that, initially, Tim received $2,000 per correct pick. But his calls were so good that, remember James Batista, who was one of his friends, one of the guys involved, he ended up bumping his take to $5,000 per pick. Which is bad business if you ask me, if he's already doing the job at $2,000. And in total, it seems that Tim received about $300,000 to pass on this inside information to the bookies. Though prosecutors have said that Tim placed bets on games directly himself as well. So, Tim was fined $500,000 and ordered to pay at least $30,000 in restitution. And he was released on a $250,000 bond to await sentencing. Now, just before his sentencing, we're in 2008 now. The NBA filed a request, it's not really the word, a demand that Tim reimburse the league for the cost of his airfare and meals, his complimentary game tickets, other expenses, including like $750 in shoes. Tim's lawyer argued that this was the league trying to retaliate against him for his misconduct. But I mean, is it retaliation if he broke his contract? Anyway, the judge ended up delaying sentencing to allow more time to decide how much restitution Tim and his buddies should pay the NBA. The NBA claimed that he owed $1.4 million, including $577,000 for his pay and benefits over 4 seasons, plus, legal fees and other expenses that were related to this internal investigation that came after the FBI was like, hey, I'm gonna look into this guy, you guys should too. So finally, on July 29th, 2008, so almost exactly a year after the investigation was first reported on, Tim Donaghy was sentenced to 15 months in jail, in prison. I think there's a difference in America. And 3 years of supervised release, which is very similar to probation. The Judge Carol Bagley Amon, wrote that she held Tim more culpable than his 2 co-conspirators in this arrangement, because without Mr. Donaghy, there was no scheme. He was released from prison in November 2009. Before his release, though, he wrote a book, a tell-all book. However, a lot of the claims in this book have been sort of debunked with evidence. And are we surprised? I mean, he's a known liar at this point. In fact, in 2020, a prominent sports journalist, Henry Abbott, said, "I've never encountered someone who lies as much as Tim Donaghy. He's so full of crap." Speaking of, Tim also claimed that in 2007, so while all of this investigation was going on, that an associate of the New York Mafia basically attacked him with the handle of an extended handle of a paint roller, which resulted in injuries to his leg and his knee, which apparently required surgery. But an FBI special agent, Philip Scala, he said that if a member of the New York Mafia, if a mobster was trying to get to Tim Donaghy, Tim would not be with us today. And with us he is. In January of 2021, Tim made his debut as a professional wrestling referee for Major League Wrestling. So this is, the Hulk Hogan type of wrestling. And he has this heel referee persona. And they sort of play up the gambling scandal in his sort of storyline persona. So where does this leave the NBA? Well, immediately after the reports came out, quite a few commentators thought that the NBA's popularity would be hurt by the scandal. Chris Sheridan of ESPN said that the general American public has been turning away since the end of the Bulls dynasty, and this fiasco isn't going to help bring it back. That doesn't seem to be the case, really, now that we're sort of 15 years on. We know that, the NBA has been growing steadily since 2016. So I think this scandal was sort of just ascribed to one crooked fella, and thankfully for the NBA, it didn't end up necessarily reflecting bad on them as an organization for too long. That being said, despite the NBA's stance that Tim was just one rogue official, a betting expert called Brandon Lang, he said that it's fairly easy for a crooked ref to fix a game on point spread. According to him, an official can directly influence the outcome of a game 75% of the time through non-calls and through, calling fouls. So after all of this went down, the commissioner revised the guidelines for the behavior of NBA referees. but not necessarily in the direction that you would think. Because despite their collective agreement sort of restricting them from participating in almost all forms of gambling, it was revealed that about half of NBA officials had made bets in casinos, and that almost all referees had admitted to engaging in some form of gambling. So, David Stern, he said that the ban on gambling is absolute, and in my view, it is too absolute, too harsh, and was not particularly well enforced over the years. And so his solution was to revise the gambling rules to allow referees to engage in more forms of betting, but not on sports. I don't know if that's necessarily the answer. It seems like they're saying, well, look, most of our referees, they need to gamble, which sounds like a problem to me. But they're basically saying, so if we allow them to gamble, but not on sports, then they're going to gamble, but not on sports. It just feels like I'd be curious to know if that's improved anything. Because if someone wanted to bend the rules a little bit before, they would gamble, but not on sports, as we know. So allowing them to now gamble in those areas won't necessarily discourage the crooked ones from gambling on their games. That's just me. There were also other referee-related rule changes in the NBA. So, whereas before they would announce the referees for a game 90 minutes before a match, that was moved to the morning of the game. They would announce the referees. That was meant to reduce the value of that information for gamblers. If a referee is particularly tough on a certain player or on a certain team, and it's openly known, then everyone will, have that information and will know how that might affect the outcome of a game. Referees also received more in-season training and counseling on gambling. There are more thorough background checks for referees. The league also announced their intention to analyze the statistical relationship between NBA games and the referees' gambling patterns for those games. And finally, the interactions between referees and players or NBA teams was made easier and more formal. So I guess it's easier to track now, and there's less of those relationships and conversations happening under the table, you would hope. But again, do no good or will do no good. All that being said, there's still no guarantee that something like this would not happen again. I mentioned earlier that Tim would manipulate the point spread as part of this whole scheme. Well, there's a gambling expert, sports gambling expert, R.J. Bell. He tracked every game that Tim officiated from 2003, where we think he started gambling, to 2007. And he discovered that during those 2 years, those 2 seasons that the NBA investigated from 2005 to 2007, the teams involved scored more points than expected by the Las Vegas books. 57% of the time. Now, in the previous 2 seasons leading up to that, that only happened 44% of the time. And so according to Bell, the odds of that sort of being a fluke are 1 in 1,000. He said there was a 99.9% chance that these results would not have happened without an outside factor. He also found that in 10 straight games in 2007 that Tim worked, the point spread had moved 1.5 points or more before the start of the game. And that's an indication that big money had been played on the game ahead of tip-off. However, Bell did suggest that there was no way that just a regular viewer, as it's happening, could have known that something was up with Tim's officiating if you weren't in on the fix. He said it could have been another year at least before anyone could have caught on to, this discrepancy. And with that, guys, we've come to the end of the story of Tim Donaghy and the 2007 NBA betting scandal. I just realized I was so excited because I found my football the other day that I've been tapping on a football and not a basketball. I feel very clever. It must be time for bed. So I'll say good night and I'll see you soon.